Thanks for tuning in to Proline TV for this live coverage of our Penn State 2025 preview on the Our Lads Football Network. Greg DePalma here, as always, and we're being joined by Marty Leap, who was my post-game partner last year when we covered Penn State following each and every game. That was a really hell of a ride there, Marty, for us, considering it's the first time I did it covering Penn State. And the team went just about almost as far as they could have. Almost got there. And there's even better things maybe expected this season.
Yeah, like you said, Greg, it was definitely good.
You there, Marty?
Yeah, I'm here. You got me? Yeah,
okay.
No, like you said, it was definitely a great ride last year. I mean, it was a lot of fun to cover the team as someone who has spent my entire life, since I was a little kid watching Penn State football and rooting for Penn State football. That combination of fan analyst duo, it was a great year for it. Honestly, one of the best seasons in school history. You set your two national championship years aside in '82 and '86. Put those two seasons aside, it was probably top three at worst, top five season in program history. Was a lot of fun. And like you said, this year you might have even bigger things on the horizon because the majority of that team is running it back to make one last run with that group of trying to win a national championship.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of that regarding the team. And of course, not just the veterans coming back, but the newbies. Let's start off, first of all, Marty, with coaching changes, because I do know, based on just even a few shows that I've already done here, previewing the season, that there are some coaching changes for Penn State. So which ones are the most important?
Yeah, we'll start with the big one, obviously, on defense. It was a crazy few weeks, that defense coordinator search there, because it was, I think, like 48 hours after the loss to Notre Dame when some smoke started to surface that Clemson was targeting Tom Allen, and that came to fruition. And this is no knock on Tom Allen, because I think Tom Allen is a very, very good defensive coach. Penn State's defense last year obviously was very good. I think they found a way to upgrade, because you could probably make an argument that Jim Knowles is the best defensive coordinator in college football. Now, when Allen first left for Clemson, at the time Ohio State was still playing, they were preparing for the national championship game and against Notre Dame. And, you always wonder, because when Knowles went to Ohio State, Penn State made a run at him, then wound up with Manny Diaz. So it worked out pretty well for him, that even though they didn't get Knowles. So you wondered if Franklin was going to take another swing at Jim Knowles. And he did. It looked like it wasn't going to happen. It looked like it was going to be Danton Lynn, and there's NFL names getting thrown around. And then shortly after the national championship game ends, you hear that, Knowles maybe isn't happy in Columbus, and the smoke starts to rise again. And sure enough, within a couple of days, Jim Knowles is the defensive coordinator. An absolute home run of a hire. Again, first and foremost, the guy might be the best defensive coordinator in college football. And then you throw in the fact that, you steal him away from your biggest competition in the Big Ten, from a school just won the national championship. And I think one thing with that made Knowles so enticing was, I know the one area where James maybe had some issues with Tom Allen last year is he felt sometimes in the bigger games, the Oregon game early on, the Ohio State game after Penn State jumped up to a 2-score lead, the second half against Notre Dame, and the bigger moments, he felt like Allen kind of struggled with his play calling and things of that nature on defense. And Jim Knowles has been there, done that, right? He just won a national championship. He's coached in the playoff multiple times. So I think that experience is vital. So yeah, that was a big one. And then running backs coach, you lose Jalen Sider to Notre Dame, between the Orange Bowl, losing one of your longest assistants and best assistants to Notre Dame, and then some recruiting losses to Notre Dame this offseason. I know a lot of Penn State fans already didn't like Notre Dame, but that anger is probably at a fever pitch right now. But, again, you make a hire in Stan Drayton, who I'm not going to sit here and say Stan Drayton is definitely an upgrade over Jalen Sider, because I think Jalen Sider is tremendous. But Stan Drayton, if you look at his track record as a running backs coach, is pretty freaking good. Between his time at Texas, at Ohio State, there was a lot of demand there for Stan Drayton on the market, not just at Penn State. He's coached in the NFL. And from everything that's been reported and we've heard, it seems like he has absolutely clicked with this running back room. And I think there's some quiet confidence in Happy Valley that, as good as those running backs have been with Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, that because of Drayton, and again, this isn't a knock on Sider. We know it is. Sometimes you get that fresh perspective, right? That fresh voice, change some things up in the room. There's some confidence here that this running back room may be even better this year, even when, as good as those two have been. So, yeah, I mean, you lose two assistants. The Sider one was obviously a big blow because he's been at Penn State for so long. He'd been here since 2018. He was one of the best recruiters in the country. But again, Drayton, I'm not going to say it's an upgrade, but I don't think it's a downgrade. And then defensively, I think you undoubtedly upgraded with adding Jim Knowles as your defensive coordinator. So yeah, it was a good offseason on that front. They now officially added Dan Connor, which is a name a lot of Penn State fans know, as the linebackers coach. He's kind of been linebackers coach without a title the last couple of years, but now they've changed some of the rules and how many full-time assistants you can have. He officially has that linebackers coach title as well. And I know that's another one that, some really good early returns there. So, but then that's one thing with James Franklin. I could probably count on one hand the amount of hires he's made that have not worked out in his now 10 plus years at Penn State. He's always been very good with his assistant coach hires, identifying guys who are going to fit the program, fit the culture. And it definitely seems like he did that again this offseason.
It makes him look good.
Yeah.
So that's important. He's got enough criticism.
Yes.
So as far as Knowles, though, so what you're saying is do you think Knowles was he going through a contract issue with Ohio State? Was it one of those things where he wasn't sure if he was being respected or not, and then the Penn State offer came and he just bolted? Or how did that go down?
It seemed to be a little bit of both because he wanted a new contract with Ohio State, and I think he would have been fine to take a little bit less money. I mean, he got on the open market. He's the highest paid defensive coordinator in the history of college football now, so I'm sure he's not trying over that. But there seemed to be some real issues there between himself, Ryan Day, and defensive line coach Larry Johnson. And I mean, Penn State fans, we know Larry Johnson very well. He was here for a very long time, tremendous recruiter, tremendous developer of talent. But if anyone remembers how Larry Johnson's tenure ended at Penn State and essentially him, having his feelings hurt that he was not hired as the head coach and Bill O'Brien left. And he wasn't afraid to put that out there. And then he bolts to Ohio State. It's not unreasonable to see where he wouldn't get along with his defense coordinator.
Okay.
So it seems like what it was Knowles was not given complete reign on what to do defensively. And Larry Johnson was having more of a say than he would have liked. And when he tried to talk to Day about it, Day sided with Larry Johnson and the whole situation got sticky. I mean, right down to the very end when Knowles was told not to attend, because part of the reason I remember the weekend when the news broke that Knowles was going to be the defense coordinator. It was like early Friday morning where you kind of knew, back channeling, talking to people, hey, this is happening. It's going to be Jim Knowles, but Sunday's the national championship parade in Columbus. He wants to celebrate with his team. He'll be here Monday. It'll be announced Sunday evening. Great. No problem. He had the deal with Penn State, was signed, sealed, delivered. And he was told by Ryan Day, don't even come to it. Like, stay home. We don't. And it was like, well, I'm not going to come then. So I think, you could see where that disagreement was there. And again, like I said, Penn State made him the highest paid defense coordinator in the history of college football. It's going to be hard to say no to that money. But when you're having issues with your defensive line coach and with your head coach, and I think that's one thing with James Franklin, where he has a really good reputation in the business, is he'll tell you, and other than a couple of times where he intervened on offense and the offensive coordinators got fired, so there's a reason for it, his coordinators are the head coaches of their units. And he'll say that, hey, if you're my defensive coordinator, you're the head coach of the defense. I'm help with game planning, obviously, but you do your thing, same thing on offense. So I'm sure that was enticing. And, Knowles is a kid. He's from South Philadelphia. He mentioned this in his introductory press conference, how growing up, his parents were huge Penn State fans. Everybody around him was Penn State fans. So Penn State football was life growing up for him. So I'm sure that opportunity to come back home was also enticing, and, it give him a chance to try and now win a national championship back at the school that he grew up rooting for and being a fan of.
That's great. Yeah. And look, the reason I wanted to spend a little bit more time on this than normal is just because it's just such a, like you said, the highest paid defensive coordinator in the game for a reason. And Penn State's had this really big issue staring right in front of their faces. And they'll be at Columbus this season. And that's a great opportunity when you bring in a guy like Knowles, who will do everything in his power to make sure that Penn State can finally crack through against Ohio State. So absolutely a very big acquisition, maybe one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in this offseason as far as assistants in college football. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, one other quick note with Knowles, I think that's important too, as you mentioned, helping over the Ohio State bump, this is one thing James Franklin's talked about, Andy Coulter, Nicky Drew Aller, they've all said it. Sometimes be able to have him in the room and do that self-scouting for the offense might be as beneficial as anything. Because look at the last 2 years against Ohio State. The defense did their part. It was the offense coming up short.
Absolutely.
You can sit there with that coordinator. Hey, here's the game plan I had against you guys. Here's why it was successful. Here's what we we can work to 6 now. So that may prove to be as beneficial as anything for Penn State.
Okay, as far as the spring, first of all, was there a spring game? I know that's been rare now these days. And was there anything going on?
It was.
No,
it wasn't televised, and it was very different. But it was one of those things. James Franklin got way out in front of it early in spring ball. I was like, listen, I understand this day is very important to the community because it is. There's still, even for the spring game, there's 60, 70, 80,000 people. That thing, the business that brings to State College for the weekend, they didn't want to lose that. So they called it a spring game, but it was definitely not your traditional spring game.
Yeah, and that's part of the downside of everything going on with the transfer portal. But hopefully they'll figure that out in a few years because they need to stick with that. That's got to be something that you do. You just have to. I don't know how you stick with it, but it's just like you said, it's just too important for a lot of the college communities, and it's just a really good gathering spot too once a year for the program. Okay, so talk about, like, were there any big storylines at all regarding jobs that were won or lost, or injuries, or anything like that?
Yeah, well, the biggest injury-wise, the biggest news to come out of the spring, and it was after spring practice, redshirt freshman defensive end Max Granville, who was expected to play a very big role this year in pass rushing situations. Shortly after spring ball, when he's back home in Texas working out, suffered an injury where he'll miss the entire season. So in terms of spring injuries, that one's probably the biggest. I mean, the other injuries you dealt with this spring, a lot of it was guys who, hey, you had off-season surgery, let's not push it, or you tweak something minor at spring ball, take it easy. Okay. So no real big injury concerns other than the Granville one. That was tough because defensive end, they're very good at the top still with the Dennis Sutton. Zariah Fisher's a guy the staff has a lot of high hopes for. But Granville was expected to play a big role. And there's not a ton of depth at defensive end. So it could be one of those where, on the surface, it may not seem like a huge deal, but you just kind of chalk that one away for later in the season where, that's one that, you may see come back and potentially just depth-wise be a pain to have to deal with down the road. But other than that, they made it out of spring ball healthy, which is always very important, obviously. And, you always want to see young guys kind of step up in spring. And
sure.
I think you started to see that the offensive line, some of the young defensive linemen that they're going to have bigger roles for this year. We'll get into it because I know we're going to talk about incoming freshmen, but Yvonne Kemajo, who's a true freshman defensive end, they came into the spring not sure if he was. James always says he's going to green light or red light his freshman. He's going to be green lit now, and even without the Granville injury, he just had such a great spring. You were going to see him play this fall regardless. On the offensive line, you see some of the younger guys who had really good springs. Javen Williams was a former 5-star recruit. He's now in his third year on campus. The light seems to really be starting to go on there. And I think running back will be another one that'll be fun to watch in the fall because you know what you have in Singleton and Al.
Yeah.
But there's so much young talent behind them. Tyke Hayes, true freshman out of Aliquippa. And anyone in Pennsylvania knows about Aliquippa football. They have, I could be wrong, but I know this was correct at one point. And it may have changed. Let me put it that way. But I know they've produced more Hall of Famers than any other high school in Pennsylvania for the NFL. Like, it's just, that's what Aliquippa is. They churn kids out. And that's where Tyke Hayes is from. He had a huge spring. The staff is very high on him. Corey Smith and Quentin Martin, two other young running backs who had really good springs that the staff was high on last year, and you saw some in games. And I think defensively, a lot of the return on the young defensive backs, they were also very pleased with. Because at secondary, you've got two really good anchors in A.J. Harris and Zakee Wheatley, but you need some of these younger guys to step up, and that seemed to happen this spring. Babu Torre and Dejon Lane are two young safeties who had really strong springs. Kenny Woosley, a redshirt freshman cornerback who seemed to really turn some heads, I think was a little bit ahead of schedule where they anticipated him to be this spring. So there's definitely a lot of those younger guys who I think are going to be more depth pieces potentially, but you need that, especially in, modern college football where you're looking playing 14, 15, 16 games, had big springs. And one other guy, because I see his name on the screen now, let me think of it. I wrote down when I mentioned Xavier Gilliam, redshirt freshman defensive tackle, who from the time he got on campus last year was ahead of where the staff expected him to be, had a huge spring and has completely solidified himself as DT3 behind Durant and Ford. So it's definitely a name to keep in mind for this year. That might be the next big thing on Penn State's defensive line.
Well, I will be asking you about potential breakout performers, so maybe he'll be on that list. But before we get to that, I tell you what, maybe this is as good a time as any to take a look at the depth chart. Of course, Tucker does a great job with the depth chart. It's not easy in college, though, especially this time of year. So what do you, is just taking a look at the depth chart, and we'll break down everything later. But just taking a look at the depth chart, do you see anything out of place regarding players that should be starting, players that should be, number 2, that kind of thing?
I think really offensively, the only thing is a right tackle. Once Anthony Donk is back healthy, he's going to be your true starter.
Okay.
But Nolan Rucci's still going to play starter minutes, especially how well Rucci. I mean, last year you could make an argument from the Big Ten championship game on, Rucci was their best offensive lineman. So Rucci's going to play, But Donkey was probably their best offensive lineman before he tore his knee against Minnesota. So you're not. But again, hey, that's a good problem to have, and those are the things you need to have if you're going to have the type of season like they think they can. You need to be able to roll 3-4 deep comfortably at offensive tackle, because it's the offensive line. Injuries are going to happen, or if nothing else, you want to keep guys fresh. Because that was one thing last year I think really benefited them in the playoff, was being able to rotate comfortably 6, 7, 8 offensive linemen, 6, 7, 8 defensive linemen. When you got to the playoff, those guys at the top of the depth chart had a little less tread than some others did, and that helped them really push SMU and Boise around, and they pushed Notre Dame around for most of that game too, and just coughed it up at the end. But I think, like I said, once Donk is healthy, he'll be the starter right tackle, but you're going to see a lot of Nolan Rucci.
And what is the status of Donka? And any other players that may or may not be ready for week 1?
As far as I know, the belief is everyone who had anything done in the offseason would be ready for week 1. Now, you start the year with Nevada, Villanova, and Florida International.
Cupcake City.
And then you have a bye week, and then you get Oregon. Those first 3 games into a bye week, I don't know how much you're going to see of some of these guys to make sure they're 100% healthy and nice and fresh for the whiteout in Oregon. It is. It's going to be treated like the NFL preseason. They're going to play some, because you don't want Oregon to be the first game of the year. They're not going to rust off. But you're probably not going to see a lot of these guys for more than a quarter or a half in most of these games. Again, I think that's part of the thing. If you're Penn State, this schedule couldn't set up much better. You have 3 absolute cupcakes and a bye week to get ready for Oregon.
Yeah, and better not lose that one then under that scenario. Okay, so let's go to the defensive side, and we already, I already know that we're going to have to remove Max Granville. Yes. And we'll move him down here. There's usually a little spot down here somewhere with I guess there's nobody currently injured or anything like that. So he'll be the first one. So who else? Does anybody else look out of place on defense?
I think the only real thing I would change is Anai White is a guy who I don't see him in the 2 deep. He came in with a lot of hoopla from Texas A&M because he's a former 5-star recruit from Philly. But
he's up here.
Yeah, Jalen Harvey is definitely ahead of him at defensive end, because I think this year you're going to see Dennis Sutton and Fisher are definitely your starters, and then after that, Kemba Joe and Jalen Harvey will be the next 2 off the bench at defensive end. And I think you may see a little bit of Malachi Williams mixed in there as well. But otherwise, I think the only other real I think linebacker, again, you don't know. Some of it's going to depend on the system. Rather, Amari Campbell is a quote-unquote starter, but he's going to play a lot.
Does that mean DeLuca could be the co-starter with Rojas?
Yeah, but again, I think a lot's just going to depend on opponent matchup too. Like, you're going to run a different defense against Oregon than you're going to run against Iowa. Against Iowa, you're going to be more of a traditional 3 linebackers because we know you're going to run the ball at us. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But the one other name I would mention though for defensive tackle is I would definitely put Owen Wafel on there, a transfer from Michigan. He will be a redshirt freshman, had a really strong spring, and seems like he'll be in a position to potentially get some reps at defensive tackle this year. But other than that, I think that's pretty spot on for how things are going to look once the fall rolls around.
Okay, so that would be this kid here, Owen Wafel. Okay, so add Owen, and where do you believe he should be?
Defensive tackle. Maybe not necessarily in the 2 deep, but Deion Barnes likes to rotate 5, 6, 7 guys in if he can. So he's definitely going to be a kid who I would expect to see some playing time this year.
Okay, and he could just be put in anywhere.
That's what I would say, because again, I think your defensive tackle, the majority of the heavy lifting is going to be Durant, Ford, and Gilliam. But I think whenever, hey, right before the half, you try to spell guys or the game's starting to get lopsided, Wafel's going to be him, and Andrews and Cook are going to be 3 you're going to see getting a lot of run there. So,
okay, meaning that you would actually move Blanding down.
Yeah, probably. I'm trying to think.
So you would have Cook, Andrews, and Wafel.
Yeah, I think Cook, Andrews, Wafel, and probably even Gilliam. They're all kind of they're thrown together. You know what I mean? That's your next wave. Those are the guys that in a year or 2 you're going to be expecting more from, but you still will probably see some of them this year.
Okay, got it. Move down, Blanding. Got it. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at. Actually, that's what we're going to do now is actually pop up the transfer board. So let's start first of all. Tell you what, let's start first of all with the guys who departed, because it's very interesting that the receiving unit, what a big change. I mean, the complete new three. You've got one graduation, but you've got Wallace and Evans out, as you can see here, and then replacing them. We'll get to the guys in just a little bit. So I don't know if the timing of this, obviously you do, but was this something where Penn State was looking to make wholesale changes to the unit, or did they lose a couple of guys and needed to replace them, as well as maybe add a guy or two?
They were going to add 2 or 3 portal receivers regardless of what happened with the kids who are already here. I think that now Trey Wallace is one. Don't twist. Nobody can twist it. They would have loved to have kept Trey Wallace. They would have. But they also weren't going to bend over backwards to keep him, knowing what they wanted to do to the room and the fact they were going to bring in 2 or 3 guys already anyhow, which they wound up doing. Omari Evans is one who, I mean, he made some splash plays at times last year for Penn State, but I know there was also some concerns in the locker room about his attitude. From my understanding, he's very much a nothing is ever Omari's fault kind of guy.
Okay.
Right down to that interception against Notre Dame where, it wasn't a good decision by Drew, but that was just a terrible route, and he made no effort to try and break the pass up either. They would have been on board with keeping Trey Wallace, but even if Trey Wallace sticks around, they were bringing in 2 or 3 transfers regardless. And part of it is just needing to change the entire culture of that wide receiver room, which I think with the transfers they brought in, some of the young guys who were there and some of the guys who are coming in this 2026 recruiting class that will sign in December, they finally have that room trending in the direction in which you needed the trend.
Yeah, it wasn't a very for Penn State. You just expected a lot more. It just looked like a hodgepodge.
It really was
of guys. Yeah, but it does. The one thing that I do notice though is that Wallace and Evans, of course, Evans is basically a big play guy, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. That's what he was. He was, if he's making plays, it's usually of the big variety. So his average is close to 20. Wallace's average is close to 16. The guys that they're bringing in don't have those types of numbers. Now, maybe that's because of where they were. Is that anything that you've noticed, the team notices, or do they have a couple of those incoming guys specifically targeting, hey, we know this might not have happened with those former teams, but we expect such and such or so-and-so to replace those numbers? Or do you expect this to be a different type of offense where they may suffer a little bit by not having an Omari Evans to go deep with?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And, if you go back and you watch a lot of Andy Kotelnicki's offenses at Kansas, there wasn't a ton of that truly take the top off the defense wide receiver. It was a lot of, hey, we're going to get you the ball in space and go make plays. And I think that's kind of what they targeted. I mean, we'll get to them obviously here shortly, but Devontae Ross and Trevor Pena especially, I think, are 2 guys who really fit that mold. Mm-hmm. And again, I think that might have been some of where the frustration came from on Omari Evans' end as well. Because when he was recruited to Penn State, Mike Yursich was the offense coordinator, and Yursich's offense, was a lot more of push the ball down the field, look for the big chunk play, than Kotelnicki was. And I think that because Kotelnicki's offense gets plenty of chunk plays, we saw it last year. They had like 3 times as many plays of 20-plus yards than they did this season prior. But a lot of Kotelnicki's are going to be from scheming up running lanes, or again, I'm going to get my playmakers the ball in space. He's got to make one guy miss, and then he's gone. Not 30, 40 yards down the field, dropping it in. So I think that may have been part of it there with Evans. But yeah, I don't think that's a concern on the staff's part. And if anything, I think, again, these receivers they brought in, especially Ross and Pena, I think kind of fit what they want to do a little bit better.
Prabula's gone, and he did what he needed to do, but he decided, I don't know how many more years he has left. I don't know if he would have had another year after 2025 because
he'll be a redshirt junior this year.
Okay, so he would have had it if he wanted it, which he probably needed. He's not. I don't think he's an NFL guy, but who knows? And then that means Drew would have been gone, and a job could have been there unless he saw the writing on the wall and knew that there was a young kid that was going to take over no matter what? Is that the case?
I think it's a little bit of both. One, like you said, he wants to play, right? He was a big part of Penn State's offense last year. No matter what any Penn State fan, Penn State fans should anything but good things to say about Bo Pribula. You can be as upset as you want that he left before the playoff started. When Drew Adler gets hurt right before halftime against Wisconsin, if Bo Pribula does not play as well as he did in the second half, they don't win that game. And they wound up winning it comfortably because he struggled on his first series and then settled in and played really well. And you wound up winning by 2 scores in the game. You probably lose without Bo Pribula. So, but I think it was a combination of he wanted to play, who wants to get this tape on film for any shot at playing in the NFL. And, coming behind him, you have Ethan Grunkmeyer, who was a top 100 recruit, who the staff absolutely loves. Okay. And I'm not saying Grunkmeyer would have been guaranteed to win the job next year over Pribula by any means, but it wasn't going to be just handed to Pribula.
Okay.
It wasn't a true, like quarterback and wait. Now, without Grunkmeyer there, maybe things change a little bit, where if he would have known, hey, I am just – as long as I stay healthy and do my thing, that's going to be my job. But he was going to have to battle with Ethan Grunkemeyer. Jackson Smolek's another quarterback on the roster the staff likes a lot. So it would have been a true competition. So I think that it was a little bit of both as to why he left.
And then the other name that sticks out to me, for obvious reasons, because you see the R back there, Cam Miller. So, and of course, I knew him anyway, following the team last year, but also Smith Vilbert. Is someone that sticks out. He hasn't signed anywhere. Is he definitely gone?
Yeah, I maybe I'm wrong. I thought he committed to North Carolina. Maybe something fell.
Did he do that recently?
Yeah, that's what I thought I saw, but that was.
As you can see, they haven't updated it here.
Yeah,
yet, so
that was definitely one that hurt. But I get it. Smith Vilbert's been in college for 6 years now, and he wanted to be somewhere he was going to be guaranteed to start his last year before trying to play in the NFL. He was going to play at Penn State, no doubt about it. He was going to be a key rotational piece on the defensive line, but he was not going to be a starter.
Okay.
So that honestly, of the transfers that left, I would argue Vilbert is the one that hurts the most, just because as I mentioned before, and you saw it in the depth chart, there's a lot of young talent on that defensive line, but a lot of inexperience.
Yeah. So
you do have a little bit of concerns about the depth there. Excuse me. So you would have loved to stuff Smith Vilbert, but I don't fault a kid for wanting to be guaranteed to start his last year in college either. And then you mentioned Cam Miller. He's a guy who is, which is unfortunate because he was a really good corner for 3 years, is never going to be remembered fondly because everyone's going to remember the play against Notre Dame when they took the lead back with 5 minutes left or whatever it was, and he slipped and fell in coverage, and Jaden Greathouse had the long touchdown to tie the game, which it's not fair to him to be remembered for that because for 3 years he was a really solid corner for Penn State, made some big plays for them. But, I wish him nothing but the best at Rutgers. I think he'll do really well there and probably parlay that into getting a shot in the NFL next year.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
and that was one, too, with Miller. That cornerback room, I think you could argue might be the best one in the Big Ten. And even though he was – even last year as the season went on, his playing time started to dwindle some. And that was definitely I think he saw the writing on the wall. And, again, not a knock on him because he's a very good player. It's just that room is very deep and very talented.
Okay, so let's take a look at the transfers coming in. And again, let's keep in mind that out of the transfers that left, the team also lost veteran guys. We'll get into, Warren was the big one. They only lost one key offensive lineman, though, correct? Sal Wormley?
Right. Yeah, that was it. It's wild. I've never seen an offensive line return their entire 2 deep.
Yeah.
One guy, especially in the transfer portal era. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Obviously, Abdul Carter's major. And then you've got Kobe King and Jalen Reed. So there were some big guys. And we'll talk about some of the guys that will look to replace them. But taking a look at the transfers that are coming in, the key guys coming in, and Campbell, Hudson, Pena, Ross, you see there at the top. Those are definitely the guys to watch, starting on defense with Campbell, because we were just going over the linebackers before. He had a pretty good year last year at North Carolina, second on the team with 76 tackles, 6.5 sacks as well. Mm-hmm. What kind of a linebacker is he, though? Because I'm looking at a guy with 6.5 sacks. Is he more of an edge pass rush guy, or what is he? What does Penn State want out of him?
Yeah, that's where I'm really intrigued to see this because especially with the Granville injury now, I think a lot of people wonder do you maybe use Amari Campbell? Because we said earlier, you still have Tony Rojas, you still have Dom DeLuca, as your box linebackers. Anthony Specca is a redshirt freshman they're very high on. So you feel pretty good about that situation. Do you maybe look to use Amari Campbell as more of a pass rusher to help make up for some of that, what's going to be lost with Max Granville? And I mean, like you said, 6.5 sacks last year, forced a fumble. I think like 11 or 12 tackles for loss. He's a very disruptive player who can play on the other side of the line of scrimmage. So, and that's one thing with Knowles that he's always kind of been known for is those creative pass rushing blitz situations, right? I mean, I know they lost the game, but look at the Michigan game last year where the play that looked like was going to swing it for Ohio State, where Jack Sawyer drops back in coverage, has that interception at the goal line, partially because he brings the linebacker off the edge where Sawyer normally be coming from. He's so good at scheming that kind of stuff up. And I'm very intrigued to see if that's what they do with Campbell as much as anything this year. And if you're Amari Campbell, I would think you'd be on board with that because think about it, in the NFL, there's few better ways to make money than the ability to go rush the quarterback. So if you can show the ability to rush the quarterback in the Big Ten, even if from a stand-up linebacker position, in a year or two, an NFL team will gladly pay you money to come do that.
And then you've got those 3 receivers there. So these are the top, the new receiving group here of Hudson, Payne, and Ross. And Hudson last year, 38, 462, 3, 12.1 average. The best size out of the group. So they did get somebody with a little bit of size. That was something I was, maybe a little concerned with originally because Pena 5'10", 186, Ross just 5'11", 160. But Ross is one of those guys, again, as you mentioned, and Pena that get them in space, and that's what they do best. Ross went over 1,000 yards last season with McCord at quarterback, a 13.7 average. Excuse me, I was with Troy. Pena had a big year with McCord, 941, 9 touchdowns, 84 receptions. And also both guys can return kicks. How do you think this is going to go down? Do you think it's possible that they're all going to get their equal share? They're all going to be, doing their own thing. Or do you just best guess, again, with no Warren, and Dinkins is now going to have to step up. But how do you see Drew? Knowing Drew, do you think he might have a favorite here?
I think a lot of it's going to depend on the situation. If Kyron Hudson, you mentioned the size there, which that's something this receiver room has lacked for a few years now. And by all accounts, he has kind of really taken over as the leader of that room, the leader of that group. I mean, he was a team captain at USC, so you probably shouldn't be surprised that he stepped into Penn State and, was acting like a team captain. And I think he's going to be your, hey, third down, we got to move the sticks, red zone, tough contested catches. He's your guy. I think Drew is going to feel very comfortable with him. There's been videos from not long after the time Hudson entered the portal and committed to Penn State of him and Drew working out together. They seem to have really established a good connection. So I think he's going to be big. Again, third down, hey, we need 6 yards to move the sticks. We're in the red zone. It's going to be a tough catch in the end zone. Hudson's going to be our guy. Ross and Pena, I'm really intrigued by, especially Ross. I mean, I think Trevor Pena gets a lot of the headlines because he had that huge season at Syracuse. And when he entered the portal, Fran Brown made the comments about the money he wanted. And the amount of money Fran Brown claimed Trevor Pena was looking for is not even remotely close to what he got or being true. But I also understand Fran Brown's end, that's that's a win-win for him because he comes out and he can say, hey, we want guys that want to be here and we're not going to break the bank. And, I get what Fran Brown was doing. But, I don't expect Pena to put up the numbers he did last year. I mean, Syracuse threw the ball more than any other team in the country by a wide margin.
Yeah.
So I think
a completely different offense here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing Penn State fans need to temper the expectations. Trevor Pena can put up, 30% of the stats he did last year and be massive for this offense. Because 30% of what Trevor Pena did last year, if Penn State would have had that, they probably would have been in the national championship game. Right, because against Notre Dame, the receivers literally did not have a single catch. So it wouldn't have taken much better receiver play to win that game probably. So I think Payne is going to be one of those guys who, and Ross as well, I've made this comparison before to when Mitchell Tinsley transferred to Penn State from Western Kentucky before 2022. And in 2021 at Western Kentucky, I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but Tinsley just put up, it was similar to Pena. Like it was something like 80 catches for 1,300 yards. And all of this, he's coming in and you're thinking, oh, wow, he's going to completely transform this receiver room at Penn State. And he didn't put up anywhere near the numbers he did when he was at Western Kentucky. But his 1 year at Penn State, he caught 51 balls for about 600 yards, had 7 or 8 scores, just a really solid, kind of number 2, number 3 receiver, something again they've really lacked the last 2 years. So I think if you get something like that out of Pena and Ross, you're going to feel very happy about it. And you mentioned the punt returning. The last couple of years, punt returning has been a disaster for Penn State. They've left so many yards on the field by just having, and I think some of this, they didn't feel comfortable in their return options of, guys go out there, fair catch the ball. And it was such a big dip down too, because 2 years ago, Daquan Hardy was an All-American punt return. He had like 4 punt return touchdowns in 2023. So I'm really excited to see Ross back there as the punt returner as well. And I think one thing with Ross that is, and should be encouraging, is yes, his stats were at Troy, but they played Iowa last year.
Oh, yeah.
And Iowa's always a good defense, and Ross tore them up. He had a punt return touchdown, caught 2 touchdowns, had like 200 yards of total offense. So again, like he's proven he can do it against not just against Big Ten competition, but against, traditionally one of the best Big Tens one of the best defenses, in the Big Ten. So
reminds me of Tez Johnson in a way.
And they're both from Troy, so that comparison definitely has been made a lot between the two. And I don't think it's totally unfair because, obviously, if you get Tez Johnson out of him, you're going to be ecstatic. But, I think, again, those 3 guys, if you can get 500-600 yards, 10 to 15 touchdowns total between them. But the biggest thing is just having that guy who can consistently catch the ball and move the sticks when you need it.
Yep.
Because that's something they haven't had a lot of the last 2 years. And if they would have had that against Notre Dame last year, probably playing for a national championship. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing. I think the running backs are going to be used a lot more in the pass game this year as well. And even at tight end, we'll get to it with tight end. They're still, even with Tyler Warren gone, and again, we'll get there, they're still so freaking deep at tight end that I think
Penn State, come on.
I don't think you're going to have somewhat of a drop off because Tyler Warren was, legitimately one of the best players in program history.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be what people are expecting.
Okay. So, and the good thing too is all these receivers are all vets. So, by the way, are they all exhausting their eligibility this year?
They are. And again, with the vet thing, I think it's important. Tyron Hudson has an entire season in the Big Ten under his belt. And I don't think you can overstate how important that is.
Yep. Okay. So let's now talk about the recruiting class. And with the recruiting class, they were, as far as rivals is concerned, they were 16th, which for Penn State, you want to be better than that. No 5 stars, 12 4 stars. So taking a look at how it all went down, regarding, the top guys from top to bottom. Let me see, pop that in there. Okay, so you mentioned Hayes. So Hayes and Coleman. They got the 2 running backs. They had a couple of tight ends, a couple of linebackers, a couple of DBs, and then but mostly a lot. There wasn't really anything that they just centered on as far as the 4-star guys. Typical Penn State, you get the tight ends, you get the linebackers and so forth, and the running backs. So no quarterback up there though, but you said they've already got one. Okay. So talk about that running back room first. Is that really where you think it is the top of this class, or is there another player or group that you think is better than the running backs?
Yeah, the running backs are very good. Again, Tyke Hayes from Aliquippa, one of the best high school programs, not just in Pennsylvania, but probably in the eastern part of the country. And then you signed Jabril Coleman, a kid from Philadelphia from Imhotep Charter, which, again, really, really good program. But I think you look at the group, you look at the class as a whole, defensive end, I think this defensive end class could be pretty special. We've already mentioned Yvonne Kemajo, who's going to play this year. Chaz Coleman, how Ohio State let that kid get out of the state of Ohio, I have no idea. I think when it's all said and done, Coleman will be the best player in this class. I think you're talking first-round defensive end guy down the road, just insanely explosive. Really came on strong with his senior year. Ohio State made a late run at him, but it was more of, hey, Penn State believed in me first. I'm sticking with him type of deal.
Are you surprised he's only a 3-star?
Yes, I am. I am very surprised. And now, again, I think part of it, he was a late riser. His senior year, he really exploded.
Where is he going to play?
Defensive end.
Defensive end.
The kid is so freaking explosive. And then you have, he was a 2026 kid originally who reclassified 2025, Daniel Jennings from West Virginia, who was shaping up to be one of the best players of how the staff feels about him in their 2026 class, who's also going to play defensive end. And then LeVar Arrington Jr. as well. Obviously the kid's going to have all the pressure in the world, but the early returns on LeVar Jr. have been very good. And I think that, again, this defensive end class could be very special. I'm also really high on the wide receiver class they signed, which, I mean, again, they need it badly. Kobe Howard and Matt Alton are two guys who could potentially play this year at wide receiver as true freshmen. And they also signed Lyric Samuel and Jeff Exeter, two other guys who some sites had them as 4 stars, some as 3. But I think they signed a really good wide receiver class as well, which, again, is very important for the current state of this roster.
So Kobe Howard, he's the top guy, right?
Yeah, he's a kid who, and I think what really excites you about Howard, if you're Penn State, the summer before his junior year, he came up to Penn State from Florida, worked out for the staff. They liked him. They loved his size, but they weren't sold on the athletic ability. Well, this past summer, then he comes back, works out again. He shaved like 0.2 of a second off his 40 time. Played this previous year at Chaminade Madonna in Florida, which is one of the top schools in the state of Florida, put up really big numbers before getting hurt. So you saw his athletic numbers improve, which I think it's always telling when a kid, like he was really interested in Penn State, Florida State, but all three of them are kind of leery on the athletic numbers. So when a kid pushes himself to get better instead of just settling for another option, and then to put up numbers playing the kind of schedule Chaminade Madonna plays, I think those things are very telling. So I don't know how much of Howard we see this year. He's going to play some, even if it's just a 4-game limit to preserve the red shirt. But that's definitely a name in that receiver room to stash away for down the road. And Matt Alton as well. Kid from Virginia, originally committed to Virginia Tech. Penn State flipped him late. Similarities between him and the Tyler Warren recruitment. Really quiet kid. Doesn't talk much. Plays at a small school in Virginia. Originally committed to Virginia Tech before flipping to Penn State. And I think Alton could be a real game breaker for them in a year or two. He's going to need a year or two in the strength conditioning program to kind of add to the body and whatnot. But I think Matthew Alton can be a real game breaker receiver for them a year or two down the road.
Okay, so for year one, give me the players that you think have the best chance of contributing.
Again, we already mentioned Kemba Joe. He's going to play defensive end.
Okay.
We're going to play him without the Granville injury. Now he definitely will.
Okay.
Like I said, I expect Howard to at least get his 4 games at receiver. Tyke Hayes, same boat. He's going to play at least his 4 games. I don't see any way they burn his red shirt unless you have a ton of injuries at running back because it's so deep on the roster already. But definitely name to watch. Andrew Olish is one I'm very intrigued by. The tight end from Pennsylvania. They flipped him very late in the cycle from Michigan. Some sites had him as a 5-star, and he was borderline 5-star at Rivals. A lot of similarities between him and Luke Reynolds, who's a kid who's going to have a big year for them at tight end this year, I think. And where if the tight end room wasn't as deep as it is, you'd already have him as green light probably. But because there's a lot of depth there, you may not need him. But he's a kid who just may force his way onto the field potentially because of his athletic ability, even if it's just on special teams. And I think one other name to kind of store away potentially is Darius Dixon, a cornerback from California from Mater Dei. Mater Dei, again, one of the top programs in the country, 4-star kid who has come in. He was enrolled in January and just took to the weight program, took to the offseason workouts, which kind of expect for a kid from Mater Dei. But, and he, by the end of spring, was quickly climbing that depth chart at corner. So, again, that's a really deep room, a lot of talent there. So, I don't know that he plays. But, and this is something we've seen James do in the past, a kid like that who's borderline green light, but you're from pretty far away, you burn the red shirt because if nothing else, hey, we're going to have you all over special teams, keep you engaged so you don't feel like transferring home in the offseason because the next year we're going to be in a big role in defense. Yeah. So Dixon's a kid who I wouldn't be surprised to see him burn his red shirt, even if it's primarily just on special teams, because he's a great athlete who could help the special teams unit a lot. And, again, can get some valuable reps late in games at cornerback for next year and beyond when he's going to have a bigger role.
And what's interesting too is that with that cupcake September, August, September, some of these guys might get some playing time there.
Yeah, I think a lot of these guys, you're going to see them have 3 of their 4 games burned by September.
And if they stick out and they go, hey, you know what? These guys are the real deal. We're going to need to burn it. Then they burn it.
And that's what you want as a coaching staff too, because then if you get into October and November and you need these guys, hey, you got a ton of experience earlier in the year. Yeah, it's a lot different having to go in Big Ten play than against those 3, but you're not being thrown completely to the fire.
Okay. Let's talk about, wrap up by talking about 2 other things. And that's really more of what's going on with the holdover class of veterans from last year. And then we'll also get into the schedule before we wrap it up. But first of all, let's go over what's going to make this team really click. Drew is the big name. I still don't know how many people believe in Drew just yet. Just when I hear talk about quarterbacks of next year's class, for the most part, or even just who's going to be like the top guys in next year's class, I don't hear Drew's name a whole lot. I hear it a little bit, but not as much as I think his name should be heard after what happened last year. Now, I don't know whether or not if I didn't watch Penn State football all year like I did because of doing the post game, that I would maybe I'd share their opinion. But since I watched a lot more of Drew than the normal person outside of Penn State who's not a fan, I really got to see a heck of a talent and somebody that I could just tell is headed in the right direction. There's so many things to like about him. We talked about he's that type of player where when he makes the bad play, like the worst play of the game for him, he comes right back on the next series and marches right down the field and probably puts his best series behind him, which is very rare to do for a young kid who's really, I even know it's his second year. It was his breakout year, but still talked about the mobility difference, unbelievable, night and day from year 1 to year 2. So you just think that's going to get better. If he had, and who knows, now that he's got better receiver, I know Warren, but now that you've got 3 quality wideouts that he did not have last year, and maybe one of, if not the best offensive line in college football, I can see him actually having the same type of bounce that he had last year. And if he does, he'll be consensus number 1 pick.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any player in college football who has more to gain this year than Drew Aller, if you're talking solely from the NFL. Because like you said, if he comes out and puts together the type of season he's capable of, he could easily lock down 1-1 next April, right? So, yeah, I'm with you because you mentioned how people don't follow Penn State closely. And it's true because unfortunately, what were his 2 worst games last year? Ohio State and Notre Dame over their 2 biggest games. Ohio State and Notre Dame in the college football playoff semifinal.
You're right. Yeah.
Even against Boise, if you just box scored that game, I mean, there were 4 or 5 just incredible throws he made that were dropped by the receivers. So I think, you mentioned the receivers, and yes, Tyler Warren's gone, and he did so much for this team. But I do think the fact that last year, everybody knew you had to focus on Tyler Warren. Everybody put their entire effort on Tyler Warren, and the receivers still couldn't make plays. That was just so detrimental. So this year, now that you have receivers, you expect to make plays. You're not going to have one guy replace Tyler Warren, but you can have a group of guys replace him. You mentioned that offensive line. I'd argue they've got the best running back room in the country as well, at least the best top with Singleton and Allen. I think there's a big jump there to be made. And again, this team can win in a lot of different ways, but they're going to go as far as Drew's going to take them, because last year against Notre Dame, when Drew had his worst game of the season, they came up 3 points short of playing for a national championship. It's going to be the same way this year. You get into the quarterfinals, the semifinals, you're playing at Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, whoever it may be. Drew's going to have to play well for them to win that game. Even if it's like Notre Dame, because look at Notre Dame. Nicholas Singleton had the game of his life, and everyone forgets about it because of how that game ended. But Nick Singleton was on another level in that game against Notre Dame last year. But in the end, it didn't matter because when they needed the passing offense to come through, it didn't come through, and that's what cost him. That's everybody remembers. So I think there's more there for him. I also think being in year 2 in Andy Kotelnicki's offense is very important, right? His first 2 years as a starter, you had 2 different offensive schemes.
Good point.
So, now to be year 2 with Andy Kotelnicki, I think that's very important because it's like any offense or any defense. Year 2, there's always more you can unlock because the players are more familiar and whatnot, right? So I think that's going to be vital for them as well this year with Drew. And they're going to go as far as he takes them, but I think there's reason to believe that he can put it together. And, you mentioned his ability to bounce back, because last year, you and I came on and talked about all the time. USC, he looked lost in the first half, and in the second half, single-handedly takes over that game, brings them back to win. The Minnesota game, right before halftime, they're down. It looks like, man, they're going to get upset here. And he marches them down the field right before the half to score. And even though Minnesota still led at halftime, that drive right before the half gave them the momentum going into the half. Penn State took over in the second half, coming back and wins. He was so good at that last year, even against Oregon. Early on was struggling through that pick 6 where Oregon went up 28-10. And then the rest of the game until the last drive when he got intercepted. But that wasn't even, I don't even put that on him. He was just trying to force the play because there was 2 minutes left. They needed to make a play. He was tearing that defense apart. So he is very good at that. And why I'm mentioning that again after you said it is, I think not just losing in the semifinal, but the way they lost by 3 points, field goal on the last play, the interception he threw that set that up when they were in a position to at worst go to overtime.
Yeah.
I think that's going to fuel him. I'm sure it has all offseason. It's going to into the season to just bounce back, turn it around, prove people wrong. And the thing is with Drew, look at this quarterback class last year in the NFL draft. You mean tell me if Drew didn't declare he wouldn't have been, if not a second round pick. He left life-changing money on the table to come back to Penn State and make one. Obviously he's getting paid handsomely to come back, but he left generational money on the table to come back and make one last run at this. A lot of these guys did. And, I know this is a comparison a lot of people have made, but look, 2 years ago, it was Michigan who everybody came back to make one more run at it. Look what happened. Last year, Ohio State, everybody comes back to make one more run at it. Look what happened. And now this year, that team's Penn State. So that's not to say they're going to win the national championship. I think they're very capable of it. I think this is the best team they've had since 1999, the last time they were preseason number one. But I think that has a lot of these guys, Drew leading the charge, just driven. If they weren't hell-bent on winning a national championship at Penn State, there are a lot of guys, him at the front and center of it, who left a lot of money on the table to come back for one more year of college.
And the key is going to be whether he can and will take that jump that should be there, because there is more to him. There's no doubt there's more to his game that needs to be refined if he's going to be that superstar quarterback at the next level and that surefire number one overall pick of the draft. Now it's up to him to go out there and get it done, because if he doesn't, if he needs more pro coaching, it ain't going to happen. They're not going to win a national championship this year unless he can take another level to this team, because there are going to be other good teams that they're going to have to compete with, other very well coached teams, other very well talented teams. So, I feel that he can do it. And they're 7-1 right now to win the national championship. I believe that is the fourth choice overall, behind Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia. We'll get into. Oh, and by the way, they are 260 on the Big Ten, just behind Ohio State at 2-1. So they're the second choice in the Big Ten, and the win total is 10.5, 125 plus, which is actually pretty good. Minus 150 under. Which means it's actually slanting more towards 9.5, which I'm kind of surprised about, because I looked at the schedule, and to me, I do think this is a team that should be able to do what they did last year and go at least 11-1, and then run the table if they're going to win a national championship. I don't see them. I just don't see this team, especially the schedule. I think the schedule is a good enough schedule for them. No Michigan again. There are some weak points to the schedule. Throw in the fact that yes, they do have to go out Ohio State and Iowa. They did not have to play Iowa last year, but in general, get Oregon at home, which is important. And they really only have two tough road games, Iowa and Ohio State, and then throw in the home game against Oregon. So those are just three games really on their schedule, where if they lose any game other than those three, it's going to be a big surprise. So therefore, what the line Vegas is saying is that they think that, yeah, it might be tricky for them to go 2-1 in those games. And I'm like, no, they should go 2-1 in those games. So that's why I think they're a pretty good over bet at again, I think it's plus 120 over 10.5.
Yeah. And two other schedule caveats I want to point out. One, you play Iowa and Ohio State back to back. However, you have a bye week in between there, which I think is very important.
Okay.
Iowa, if nothing else, they're physically going to beat you up. Even if you win the game, you're going to limp out of it a little bit. So you have a week off to recover from Iowa and the extra week to prep for Ohio State, which I think can be as important as anything. Also, because we saw last year one of the Big Ten expanded this way, how much teams kind of struggled going East Coast to West Coast and back. You got to go to UCLA, but UCLA I think will be better this year, but you're not. That's a game you're going to win easily.
But should win, yes.
What's nice there is you come back home and have Northwestern, which not a knock on Northwestern, but if you have a game where you're not going to get home to Christ knows what time Sunday morning, so Sunday's probably out the window, and then you're dealing with jet lag on Monday. Like Northwestern's a team you want to be preparing for when you've got the week of jet lag and all that going on. So those are two other things with the schedule I think that set up really well for them, because I'm with you. outside of Iowa, Ohio State, and Oregon, there's no game on this schedule that should be considered an acceptable loss. And I'm not even sure I would. It's tough to say because Oregon is so talented, but that team lost so much.
Yeah.
It's going to be the first road start for Dante Moore.
Yep.
It's going to be a primetime whiteout. I just have a hard time justifying them losing that game. And again, that's not knocking Oregon. I think Oregon is very good, but if you're as good as Penn State says they are this year, when you get a team early in the season at home in probably the most volatile environment in college football with a quarterback making his first career road start, that's a game you got to win. You got to win. And I think the important thing for them is, like you said, if they're going to go, they'll probably go 11-1 in the regular season because it's really hard to 12-0, especially playing in the Big Ten and the SEC. It's really hard to do that. I just think between Oregon and Ohio State, the big thing is you got to win at least one of those two.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Then it puts you in the position too, where if you win one of those two and then still only go 10-2, you're going to feel disappointed. So,
and there'll still be a playoff team.
Yes.
But yes, that
road becomes a lot tougher especially this year doing the straight seeding, because let's say it would have been like last year where you're 11-1, get to the Big Ten title game and get tripped up. If that happens again this year, you're probably still a top 4 seed like you should have been last year. So you probably still get that first round bye as long as you at least get to Indy. Because odds are you're playing either Ohio State or Oregon, who's also coming in, 10, 11, 12 wins. So you probably both feel comfortable saying you're in the top 4 regardless of outcome there. So I think that, in the regular season, if they don't go at least 11-1, it's going to feel disappointing. But like you said, 10 wins will get you into the playoff. And I can guarantee you, last year at the end of the regular season, there wasn't an Ohio State fan in the world who felt good about their team or didn't want Ryan Day going off a bridge somewhere or something. And look how things turned out for them.
Yeah, it's a new age.
You got to get in. You got to get in, especially when you're this talented. But I will say, I think if they don't go at least 11-1, people are going to feel uneasy and feel disappointed going into the playoff. And that'll probably just put even more pressure. I think there already is a lot of pressure in James Franklin, right or wrong, for this season. I don't think any team ever should view a season as national championship or bust. Ohio State last year is probably the closest the team's ever been to saying they should view it that way. And so I'm not saying Penn State should view this as national championship or bust, but you definitely feel, hey, if not now, when? We don't play Michigan. Yeah. Ohio State's replacing a lot. Oregon replaces a lot when we get them early in the year at home. You look at the SEC. Yeah, Georgia's going to be good. Bama's going to be good, but you don't view either of them as like, the Death Star.
We're not worried about the SEC anymore.
The Death Star.
Like we used to be, the Big Ten.
Yeah, they're not the Death Star teams that they were 5-6 years ago, right? No. At least not this year. Like you go into the season where it's like, hey, most everybody will tell you Penn State, Texas might be the 2 deepest, most talented rosters. So again, if not now, when? You've got an experienced quarterback, you have maybe the best offensive line in the country, your running back room is as good as any in the country. You have probably the best coordinator duo in the country. Right. I don't think there's any team with a better duo than Kotelnicki and Knowles. I really don't. Like the stars have completely aligned for you this year. So again, I'm not saying they have to win it, but if it just feels like if you don't do it now, when will it ever happen?
Okay, let's wrap up with we spent a lot of time on Drew, but just give me give the viewers a little bit of a look at some of the other guys that you think could step up this year, the guys who are back. We talked already about the offensive line, but just quickly, which guys on the offensive line are considered like top NFL prospects?
First guy I want to mention is Vega Ione, a guard. I mean, I've seen a lot of preseason All-American stuff for him this year. He took huge strides last year. I think that he's a guy he's a guard, so probably doesn't play himself into first-round pick territory, but could be a potential All-American slam dunk day 2 pick of the NFL draft.
Okay.
And then I'm going to circle the tackles. Drew Shelton has been so much better in his career than a lot of Penn State fans want to give him credit for. He really struggled as a sophomore, but he was injured all year. So, people tend to overlook that part. And then at right tackle, I mentioned earlier with Rucci and Donka. Donka was their best offensive lineman last year until he got hurt. And after Donka got hurt, Rucci was probably their best offensive lineman. So I think the 3 tackles and Vega Ione are the 3 guys to really watch. And then Cooper Cousins, true sophomore kid, is going to be an absolute stud for them. Probably a year away from really kind of putting it all together. But again, this offensive line, it's so good, man.
All right. Okay. Dinkins. Is this all Dinkins now? This is it, even though it's a deep room, or is there going to be some competition there?
I think you're going to see a lot because, I mean, Dinkins is the best 2-way guy there. He will maul you in the running game and then, catch the pass over the middle, truck you. And, the son of Darnell Dinkins. I'm always a big believer in those good genes. Luke Reynolds is a kid who they have sky-high expectations for. Made the big play last year against Minnesota on the fake punt that, won that game for them. And then Andrew Rappleyea is a name not to forget. He gets compared, and it's lazy, to Pat Freiermuth because he wears number 87. They look exactly the same. They're both from New England. But he's very similar to Freiermuth. He would have had a big year for them last year towards ACL against West Virginia. So he's another name to watch at tight end, where I think they're so deep there, and that's going to be part of how they offset losing Warren. Is not one of those guys going to replace Warren, but those three combined, I think, can give you a lot of really good production still.
Who has the biggest upside out of the three?
As a pass catcher, I would definitely say Reynolds.
Okay.
He reminds me a lot of Mike Gesicki. Now, I think he's going to be a better blocker than Gesicki was. His blocking came along it improved substantially last year's year went on for being a true freshman. Now, I think Rappleyea, maybe from an NFL traditional tight end standpoint, maybe has the highest ceiling of that pass run combo, but as a pure catcher, Reynolds is the highest ceiling. And again, none of this is a knock on Dinkins, because Dinkins is a guy who I think goes to the NFL and quietly puts together one of those 8-year careers where he just keeps hanging around with teams because he can do so much. But again, it shows how deep that tight end room is.
Okay. And of course, we know about Singleton Allen. Who is their 2026 starter definitely on this team?
Running back?
Yes.
They're on the team. It's just a matter of who is it. Again,
so they've got enough talent that no way do they need to go out and bring in a transfer.
Quentin Martin was a 5-star kid. Corey Smith played some last year and was really impressive. We already talked about Tyke Hayes, and then Jabri Wallace-Coleman, the other true freshman from Philadelphia, who was last year set all kinds of state records in Pennsylvania as a senior in high school. That running back room, it's going to be similar to tight end this year. There's going to be a slight drop off because those top two are just so freaking good, but it's going to keep humming along.
Okay. Who do you like? Who do you think is going to out of that group? Is Martin because of the 5-star status? Does he look like that? Or
I've always liked the idea of Martin kind of being that Swiss Army knife more. Put him out in the slot, put him out wide, flex him into the backfield because he's a really good pass catcher.
Okay.
I think Corey Smith's probably the best pure running back, and then I'd go Hayes. But I think Martin's the biggest playmaker of the group. I'll just be very curious to see as his career progresses, how is he used? Because I think he can do so much more than just line up and get the ball out of the backfield.
Okay. Defense. Well, Dennis Sutton and Durant, they're going to be huge this year, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they are. I argued last year, all year, Zane Durant was the most underrated defensive lineman in the Big Ten. And I think going into the year, he is still wildly underrated by people for just how good he is.
Wow. Okay. So those are definite star players. We know about Rojas. He had shoulder issues last year. So do you expect a bigger jump this year now?
I expect him to be better. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that when he had a month off at the end of the season until the playoffs started, he had played his best football when that shoulder had a month to rest up. And then in the offseason, he was able to get the surgery and get it cleaned up.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think that health's going to go a long way for him, because there's no doubting that athletic ability. The guy's an athletic freak at linebacker. It's just a matter of having that healthy shoulder. So I do think him being healthy, I would not be surprised at all to see Rojas put together, a first-team all-conference type of season this year.
And in the defensive backfield, is there someone that definitely sticks out more than the other guys?
Yeah, I know the coaching staff thinks that they have two of the best defensive backs in the country, and A.J. Harris and Zakee Wheatley, and they're not afraid to say that. So I think those are the two you want to circle big time.
Okay.
Wheatley has almost every spring and fall camp since he's been on campus has been the turnover king. And to his credit, he is a kid who probably could have transferred 2 or 3 times and started for another Power 5 program and just waited his time. And now he's going to have it this year as a redshirt senior, really be the leader back there. So I think those are the two key guys to watch. But again, that room, it's so deep. We didn't even touch on King Mack, who transferred to Alabama from Penn State, and I was back, realized that was a mistake, and is back at Penn State. I know the staff loves having him back. Elliott Washington is a kid who came on strong down the stretch last year. Zion Tracy, if that sounds familiar, he's the one who had the pick 6 against Ohio State. He's another kid who has just continued to make plays since he's been here. This Colin Dinkins, who's Khalil's little brother, has slowly but surely come along as a key cog back there. That secondary is just, it's very, very deep.
Okay, so then lastly, give me your breakouts. So give me your official, these guys are going to be the breakout guys on offense and defense. I know you have a lot to choose from.
Yeah.
So you got to narrow it down to one or two each.
Offense is tough because I feel like there's not everyone at the top of the depth chart's proven something already, right? So I'll go down. I will say it's either Luke Reynolds or Tysier Denmark, redshirt freshman wide receiver. They're very high on. I think one of those two, this year break out and show that playmaking ability and set themselves up to really be the guy on the offense then in 2026.
Okay, so Tysier Denmark.
Yeah, I'll go with either him or Reynolds. I think one of those two are the ones is the one who does it on offense.
Okay, and defensively.
Defense. I would have, if it wouldn't have been for the injury, 100% would have said Max Granville. I was on that drum all off season. But with Granville out, I'll say Xavier Gilliam because he's going to play a lot as the third defensive tackle, especially his first few games. Because Alonzo Ford, much like Anthony Donka, also tore his ACL against Minnesota last year, so they're going to want to bring him along slowly those first couple games. So Gilliam will probably be, announced as the starter. Or even if he's not announced as the starter, be the primary guy beside Durant those first 3 games. They bring Ford along slowly. And Gilliam's very explosive. He's similar to Durant, where he's a little undersized at defensive tackle, which kind of makes him, quicker off the ball, harder to handle. As a result, allows him to be kind of like that bowling ball in there, be real disruptive. Kevin Givens was similar a few years ago for Penn State. So because Gilliam's going to play a lot, I think he starts to put it together this year to where then, going into 2026, he's one of those guys you have circled as a key cog up on this defensive line.
So Gilliam, and would that be it?
You want to give me one more? I think in the secondary, Dejon Lane's one I'm very curious to see because he is athletic testing numbers wise is one of the best athletes on this team. And last year when Kevin Winston got hurt, they threw a lot at him and he just wasn't ready yet, which is fine. But as the year went on, he started to play a little bit more and you could kind of slowly see the light starting to go on. He had an interception against Boise in the Fiesta Bowl. He's one, when that light goes on at safety, he's going to quickly become one of the top safeties in the Big Ten just solely because of his athletic ability. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see that happen with him this year. So I'll mention Dejon Lane as well.
All right. And by the way, just so everybody knows, they're in good hands or good feet with Ryan Barker,
yes,
who had a really, really impressive freshman season. So no reason to think that there's going to be anything wrong there. And they get a veteran punter back as well. So special teams, and with Ross coming in, special teams should be as good as ever, right?
Yeah, it should be because, like you mentioned, Ryan Barker was so good for them last year. Riley Thompson has been really solid for 2 years now. Gabe Nwosu, as a kickoff specialist, is one of the most underrated aspects of this team because he just takes away the other team's ability to return kicks. And then in the return game, you mentioned Devontae Ross, but that kick return unit, Nicholas Singleton back there, it wouldn't be unreasonable if there would be a game this year that, kind of swings or breaks because Singleton, the other team scores and Singleton houses the kickoff 100 yards and swings the momentum right back. Right. I mean, that happened last year against Washington in the whiteout. Washington scored, looked like they might be mounting a rally, and Singleton houses the kickoff, and that was that. So I don't think it's unreasonable there to see Singleton put together a big year's kick returner either.
Great job as always, Marty. Thanks for doing this. Hopefully we'll do more of this, similar to last year, because this could be, as you said, a national championship season, and it would be great to chronicle a national championship team all season. So appreciate that as always, Marty. And we'll be talking, of course, real soon. Otherwise, I'm going to let everybody know that we are going to continue to do these interviews for the next couple of months up until the season begins. I do not think we have anything left for this week. I think we're done so far as of right now, but we still have more interviews to go. You can check out the library here over on Proline TV and the RLads YouTube channel. So check that out, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share because you don't want to miss these interviews. They're very insightful, and they get you ready for the season like no other. So for Marty, I'm Greg. We'll see you guys again next time here on Proline TV.